James Harden situation just reached a brand new breaking point, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse. What started with James Harden just wanting a contract extension,
we are interested in bringing him back,
led to him and the Philadelphia 76ers announcing that he wants out.
Houston's a very real possibility for Philadelphia's James Harden, upwards of $60 million in cap space.
And now it seems like James Harden got finessed again, and he's trapped.
Daryl Morey is a liar, and I will never be a part of an organization that he's a part of.
So before we get to the content, we're currently coming to you guys live from the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami. My apologies if the room is a little bit dirty and if the camera quality is a little off. You know how much I love getting you guys content while I'm traveling. So make sure you drop a like, subscribe, and turn on our notifications, because no matter what scenario I'm in, if there's news, me and my team will always get the content out to you guys. And now that we get all that out of the way, cue the intro. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? On October 27, 2012, Daryl Morey made one of the biggest moves of his entire career, a decision that would without a doubt alter the course of his legacy for the rest of his career. And that's when he executed a trade for the Oklahoma City Thunder's exciting and promising sixth man, James Harden. He would take this sixth man and make him into one of the most dominant offensive players in NBA history. And you could just tell based upon how Daryl Morey spoke about James Harden during his Houston Rockets tenure that he genuinely believed that he was the greatest offensive player of all time, as you saw in this interview.
But I don't think they realized James Harden was as good as he is now, right?
That's correct. To be fair, I don't know if anyone did. We put all our assets in to trade for him, but no one could anticipate he'd be the best player in the world. Like,
why did you put all your assets? Why him?
Both the eye test, because he looks amazing. I think anyone watched him, but if you looked at data at the time, once he had the ball in his hands, and it's still true to this day, and I get a lot of because someone asked me who's a better scorer, him or Michael Jordan, and it's just factual that James Harden is a better scorer than Michael Jordan.
Based on the math.
Based on literally, like, you give James Harden the ball, and before you're giving up the ball, how many points do you generate, which is how you should measure offense. James Harden is by far number one in NBA history, and he was number one even at the Oklahoma City Thunder. He was coming off the bench. It was a little more hidden.
And I have to give credit where credit's due, because despite being handicapped by an owner that didn't want to exceed the luxury tax, Daryl Morey used advanced analytics to put the best team around James Harden at all times. Whether it was poaching Dwight Howard from the Los Angeles Lakers in 2014, or moving away from trying to get James Harden, a superstar big man who was on the tail end of his career, and bringing in a future Hall of Fame point guard to pair with him in 2017. And even once there was drama between James Harden and Chris Paul, right away, Daryl Morey did whatever it took to appease James Harden, trading away Chris Paul and bringing in Russell Westbrook. But eventually, the Houston Rockets clearly decided to go another way after their lone season with Russell Westbrook and James Harden didn't provide the results that they were hoping for. Mike D'Antoni moved on, and so did Daryl Morey. In that fall in training camp, we started to really see the true personality of James Harden. There are reports of him throwing basketballs at rookies in Houston Rockets training camp. He was wearing fat suits in preseason games. And right when he finally had the opportunity to speak to the media about what's going on, he said this.
We're just not good enough. We don't obviously chemistry, talent-wise, just everything. And it was clear, like I said, these last few games. I love this city. I literally, have done everything that I can. This situation is crazy. It's something that I don't think can be fixed. So, thanks.
And at this point, I would say I didn't really like the way James Harden went about this, but I understand the philosophy. You're on the Houston Rockets for nearly a decade. They did everything they possibly could to build a contender around you. You won an MVP with the Houston Rockets. There were multiple scenarios where you were very close to making it to the NBA Finals, but it was clear that it was time to move on. And at this point, I think it made a lot of sense for James Harden to start ring chasing a little bit. And immediately, the Houston Rockets traded James Harden Harden to the Brooklyn Nets. And at this point, I thought everything was fine. I mean, James Harden got what he wanted. He got to play with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. There were moments where we thought the Brooklyn Nets were building an unfair super team with the amount of talent that they were acquiring through the buyout market. Yes, they were acquiring players that were a little bit past their prime, like LaMarcus Aldridge, for instance. But when James Harden, Kevin Durant, and Kyrie Irving played together, this team was an offensive juggernaut and were one of the most terrifying offensive basketball teams we have ever seen in NBA history. Problem is that they didn't really play with each other all that much, partially due to injuries. During the 2021 to 2022 season, James Harden was faced with yet another test, this time in the form of one, his own injury issues, and that contributing to his inability to play with the Brooklyn Nets, but two, dealing with Kyrie Irving and his stance against vaccination and not playing in basketball games because of it, which without a doubt could be one of the most legacy-defining moments in NBA history, because Kyrie Irving's decision not to get vaccinated resulted in him sitting many games because New York had some of the strongest restrictions against players that didn't get the vaccine. There were other things behind the scenes as well, including James Harden not feeling like he was featured as much as he should have been with the Brooklyn Nets offense. But eventually, the Brooklyn Nets gave James Harden what he wanted. Ben Simmons was holding out for the Philadelphia 76ers all year long, so the Brooklyn Nets traded James Harden to the Philadelphia 76ers for Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, and 2 first-round picks. Now, at this point, I thought this was a slam dunk. James Harden has a potential MVP co-star at this point in Joel Embiid. He's reunited with the general manager that elevated his name to superstar status. At this point, James Harden made $270 million throughout his career. Considering how he played in Houston for the majority of his career, he didn't really have to pay a significant amount of tax like he would have if he played in, I don't know, LA or New York for all of his career. And considering how his effectiveness dwindled a little bit because the NBA recently passed brand new rules for drawing fouls, which without a doubt made James Harden less effective, we could all agree that at this point, James Harden was past his prime, but was still a very, very good player. And when James Harden and the Philadelphia 76ers lost to the Miami Heat in the Eastern Conference semifinals, and right after Joel Embiid even said this,
you know, since we got him, everybody expected the Houston James Harden, but that's not who he is anymore.
Harden decided to show the ultimate commitment to his franchise by taking a significant pay cut, going from $47 million a year to $33 million a year on a 2-year, $68 million contract, second year being a player option. With that money, the Philadelphia 76ers did everything they possibly could to make themselves more competitive, pursuing players like Daniel House and PJ Tucker, both of whom James Harden had a relationship with. Now, this past year is where things got a little interesting. Around January, you started to hear rumors that James Harden would like to go back to the Houston Rockets. As a matter of fact, in April, we heard that James Harden's future is very unclear in Philadelphia. Houston is very much in play for him. Eventually, we would get this huge article from Sam Amick titled James Harden, the Houston Rockets, and an undeniable bond that refuses to go away. This article discussed James Harden's love for Houston, the extracurricular activities, the tax savings, and his love for the ownership as well. I personally believe that this was implanted by James Harden's camp just to give him some leverage, and we were even seeing funny memes like this: James Harden and Ime Udoka at Houston strip clubs next season once Ime Udoka was announced as the head coach of the Houston Rockets. You see, the Houston Rockets had a plethora of cap space, which would be more than enough to pay for James Harden and even potentially bring in another superstar teammate, but eventually they ended up signing Dillon Brooks and Fred VanVleet and kind of committed more to developing their own homegrown talent, which I don't necessarily think is the worst idea. Things would hit a brand new breaking point for James Harden and the Philadelphia 76ers, losing to the Boston Celtics in a very embarrassing fashion during their final game of the season. James Harden would have some very interesting moments. The first one being when he was asked to endorse Doc Rivers as his head coach. This is what James Harden had to say.
How has your relationship been with Doc, and would you like to see him back?
Our relationship is okay.
And shortly after Doc Rivers said that he expected to coach the Philadelphia 76ers next year.
Are you planning to be the coach of the team next year?
Yeah, I think I got 2 years left. So,
given the tenor of what you've seen happen in the last 2 or 3 days, where coaches of the year, guys with titles.
Yeah, no one's safe in our business. and I get that.
The Philadelphia 76ers would announce quickly that they were moving on from Doc Rivers, opting for Nick Nurse. Now, this was probably done to appease James Harden. I mean, Daryl Morey said from the very beginning that he intended on bringing back James Harden.
Follow up with James obviously having the player option. Do you anticipate him being back here with the Sixers, being able to re-sign him?
James. We can't have those discussions yet, but we are interested in bringing him back.
But eventually, we would find out that James Harden wants to completely move on from the Philadelphia 76ers, announcing on July 1st that he was going to opt into his $35.6 million player option en route to asking for a trade, which means he's opting in for the purpose of hoping that he could get traded to a different team. His ideal destination was the Los Angeles Clippers. And apparently, this is why James Harden is so upset, because he feels very betrayed by how the Philadelphia 76ers handled his free agency, at least according to this article by Sam Amick back in late June. Why James Harden's reunion with Daryl Morey in Philadelphia went south and what's next in their looming divorce. Now, bear in mind, this came out right after James Harden said that he was going to opt into his player option just to find a trade to a different team. And you could tell how he kind of screwed himself over here. And the language in this article is hilarious. It says, while it seems likely that James Harden will land with the Clippers, it remains to be seen whether his longtime basketball partner, Sixers president of basketball operations Daryl Morey, will grant this unexpected wish. Sources say, however, that there is strong optimism on Harden's side that it will indeed happen. Both Kawhi Leonard and Paul George are said to be on board with the idea of Harden potentially joining their core. Even with the playoff frustrations and the challenge of sharing the spotlight with someone as dynamic and dominant as reigning MVP Joel Embiid, there was a sense around the league that the chance to contend for his first title again might be enough to bring James Harden back. Moreover, many believe that the late May hiring of Nick Nurse to replace Doc Rivers as coach would lead to Harden re-signing, but in the end, sources involved in the matter said that it was a series of silent Sixers signals sent in recent weeks that compelled Harden to pursue that goal elsewhere yet again. And bro, this is what I mean when I say I feel like some stars in today's NBA are so freaking spoiled, because if James Harden just wanted more money, why wouldn't he have just stayed in Houston the whole time? You demanded a trade from Houston to the Brooklyn Nets so you could compete for championships. And then you demand a trade from Brooklyn to the Philadelphia 76ers because you could reunite with Daryl Morey, the general manager that always understood you, and still compete for championships without dealing with all of the media headlines. And now you're demanding a trade from the Philadelphia 76ers to the Los Angeles Clippers because you want more money? I mean, how does that even work? So when Harden decided to take a significant pay cut nearly a year ago, declining his $47.4 million player option with the Philadelphia 76ers to sign a 1-year plus 1 deal in which he would be paid $33 million for the 2022 to 2023 campaign, there was a widespread belief that it was a classic case of quid pro quo. James Harden would give some money back as a way to help the Philadelphia 76ers fill out their roster, thereby inching them closer to a title that has eluded the franchise since 1983 and for his entire professional career. And in the following offseason, many presumed the 10-time All-Star and former MVP would be handsomely rewarded with a contract more befitting of his future Hall of Fame talents. Now you can see back then James Harden had significantly more leverage. The article teases him potentially rejoining the Houston Rockets. This is before free agency after all, but as you can tell, Harden's leverage significantly diminished following this, and I have to admit Daryl Morey handled this masterfully. According to Adrian Wojnarowski, we found out that the Philadelphia 76ers have ended trade talks on guard James Harden and plan to bring him back to training camp for the start of the season. The Sixers had periodic off-season conversations with the Clippers, Harden's desired destination, but no traction on a deal materialized. Now, I don't think you necessarily had to be a genius to figure out that this is what was going to happen because, well, the Clippers don't really have any assets to make the Sixers improve, and James Harden already opted in at this point. So by doing this, James Harden is yet on another year of a contract where he's getting paid less than what he believes he deserves. This is kind of what happened with Kyrie Irving last offseason with the Brooklyn Nets. He demanded a trade with the Brooklyn Nets and threatened to opt out if they didn't trade him, but there was no market for Kyrie Irving's talents, like there wasn't any market for Kyrie Irving's talents when he was with the Dallas Mavericks this past offseason as well. So Woj continues to say that the Sixers and Harden agreed to seek a trade together after Harden picked up his player option for 2023 to 2024, but Philly believes it has a championship team with Harden and want to find a way to make it work with him this season. Harden has been emphatic in wanting a trade, so the Sixers are setting up an uncomfortable situation to start camp. Ultimately, Philadelphia wouldn't make a trade that they believed would compromise their title hopes. So Daryl Morey is playing hardball with James Harden in his camp. And for those of you guys wondering why James Harden is stamping his feet, it's because he believes that he is deserving of a long-term max contract from Philadelphia. Harden is unhappy with Sixers president Daryl Morey over a lack of a long-term maximum level contract offer, sources said. And the Sixers are risking Harden's arrival at training camp, bringing with it anything but a championship mindset. So if you remember last year, there were a lot of reports about James Harden is locked in on winning a championship. He has a championship mindset. That's his primary focus. And honestly, I praised him for taking the pay cut that he did. But if he invested it wisely at all, I feel like he's gonna be okay when it comes to money. And again, if he just wanted money, why would he demand a trade from Houston to begin with? Well, things are getting way worse. I mean, it's getting really ugly because we waited a couple of days and, well, Daryl Morey pretty much told James Harden what we all believed. And that could be best summed up with this meme. So it gets way worse because James Harden is still declaring war on the Philadelphia 76ers. He doesn't plan to play for Philadelphia despite the end of trade talks. And this is coming to us via Sam Amick. And the article opens up with exactly what I was thinking. In a situation that is reminiscent of the Ben Simmons saga 2 seasons ago, a team source confirmed to The Athletic that the 76ers have decided to end trade talks on disgruntled star James Harden and are now planning on him being in training camp late next month. Yet, as Sixers president of basketball operations Daryl Morey is well aware, the prospect of fixing this fractured relationship between Harden and the organization that he no longer wants to play for is not that simple. Not even close. No matter what signals the Sixers might send when it comes to trade talks, a source close to Harden reiterated that the 10-time All-Star and former MVP no longer wants to play for Philadelphia and has no plans of taking part in training camp. Does that mean he won't report if a deal doesn't go down by that point, or that he'll make a messy spectacle of his training camp arrival like he did when he was trying to get out of Houston back in December of 2020? That part remains unclear, with Harden's side still expressing a belief that there will be meaningful developments on the trade talk front before that time comes. The source spoke on the condition of anonymity because of the sensitivity of the situation. And it's really interesting because the guy that James Harden was traded for, Ben Simmons, was in this exact same situation. He quite literally held out in training camp going into the regular season because of how frustrated he was. And I don't necessarily know if that worked out so well for him. Personally, I feel like if James Harden got traded to the Clippers, you will see a drop off in his production. I mean, between Russell Westbrook, Paul George, James Harden, and Kawhi Leonard, assuming that they're all healthy, I don't know if there's enough ball to go around. And wasn't James Harden frustrated on the Brooklyn Nets because they weren't featuring him enough on the offense to begin with? But the article continues to say, trade talks between Philadelphia and the Clippers this summer have clearly been stagnant. There's no need for the Sixers to make a public proclamation like this if it wasn't the case. But as always, there's a human component here that will make these next 7 weeks worth watching. So Harden plans not to report to training camp, and he has no interest in reporting to training camp. And it seems like at this point, they're just going back and forth because we would get a viral video of James Harden quite literally saying Daryl Morey is a liar and he'll never be part of an organization that he's a part of.
Daryl Morey is a liar, and I will never be a part of an organization that he's a part of. Let me say that again. Daryl Morey is a liar, and I will never be a part of an organization that he's a part of.
Could we stop and just appreciate the absurdity of this clip? Daryl Morey is a liar, the man that quite literally elevated you from a 6th man of the year candidate and put you in a position to win your first MVP. Because bear in mind, James Harden doesn't win MVP if it's not for Daryl Morey bringing in Mike D'Antoni and trying to recreate a system similar to what the Phoenix Suns of the mid-2000s had, but with James Harden. As a matter of fact, it's practically the same system, except you replace the Steve Nash, Amari Stoudemire pick and roll with the James Harden isolation. That doesn't happen without Daryl Morey. And this is how James Harden feels about Daryl Morey now, just because he's not paying you $14 million more a year. So Daryl Morey is relatively unmoved. It's almost like a man that's in a toxic relationship, because according to Jason Dumas, he still plans to keep James Harden despite this. So it seems like Daryl Morey is well versed in James Harden's behavior, and this is not over in the slightest. Now, Kyrie Irving would actually reply to Adrian Wojnarowski's tweet that says, disgruntled Harden calls the 76ers president Morey a liar by saying, is he disgruntled, Adrian, or is he holding Daryl Morey accountable for his dishonesty and lack of transparency throughout the contract negotiation process this summer? Which, by the way, I find it comical that Kyrie Irving is calling out Daryl Morey for not holding himself accountable for his dishonesty and lack of transparency in regards to contracts, where he quite literally did this.
You're going to leave us like LeBron left us?
It's a great question. No, I won't leave. I'm not leaving.
This.
You guys will have me back. I plan on re-signing here next year.
And most recently left the Brooklyn Nets after saying this. Once that summertime hits, I know we'll have some conversations, but there's no way I could leave my man 7 anywhere. But at the same time, there's a huge issue here. We've already discussed the huge history that James Harden and Daryl Morey have with one another. I mean, Daryl Morey has elevated James Harden's career. There's no discounting that. But at the same time, James Harden feels cheated. Why? Because they had a handshake agreement that James Harden should get paid a max contract following his contract's expiration or after taking a pay cut for a year. And now it seems like Daryl Morey is going back on that promise. And as a result, James Harden feels betrayed. And I don't blame James Harden for feeling betrayed. Like, don't get me wrong, I think he's made more than enough money and he should be taking small little pay cuts just to slightly increase his championship window. But at the same time, it's never a good feeling to be lied to, especially in business, especially with quite literally the only man you could really trust as a general manager. Daryl Morey's doing what's best for his team. From a business standpoint, there isn't much of a market for James Harden in a trade or if he opted out as a free agent. But at the same time, I don't blame James Harden for feeling betrayed. At the end of the day, I think James Harden is getting paid what he deserves. He's no longer the superstar that he once was. He's a really freaking good player though, but he keeps shooting himself in the foot. We talk about how Kyrie Irving always grabs headlines and shoots himself in the foot for winning championships. Probably the greatest example of this is leaving LeBron James when he was with the Cleveland Cavaliers and then leaving the Boston Celtics and that young core to join the Brooklyn Nets is probably the best example. Or hell, even leaving the Brooklyn Nets once they were starting to look very, very promising in the middle of last season because he didn't see eye to eye with ownership. But I'm gonna make an argument and say James Harden shoots himself in the foot way, way worse. And James Harden is being placed in better situations than Kyrie Irving is. He's quite literally getting everything he wants, each and every stop that he's at. And it seems like he's never satisfied no matter where he is. So this is not over. If we have seen from years past, if we notice what happened with him and the Houston Rockets with the fat suit, we all know training camp is going to be a movie. We're going to bring you guys every single update as it comes. So let me know what you guys think about the James Harden situation in the comment section down below. Do you think that he's being rational here, or are you on Daryl Morey's side? I'd like to hear what you have to say. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike. I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.